Welcome everyone to the online ATAR revision analysis desk. I've added a little bit extra to that just so everyone knows what ATAR support do. We are here with FLC and Checkers, and we're going to go through what these top three teams need to do to get through to the finals and to take the grand finals. They've all got their strengths and weaknesses, and they've all got their individual play styles that have kind of grown over the last 5 weeks. So here we go. FLC, what do you got for us, mate?
All right, so this week obviously there wasn't any matches. Well, there weren't any matches that I'm supposed to analyze anyway. Um,
Yeah, let's pretend that match
we're
didn't
not gonna.
exist.
We're just gonna see. Like Checkers was in the VC first, so we kind of agreed that that never happened. Um, all right, so what we're going to take a look at this week is we're going to go through the three teams that we've got in our playoffs, and we're going to go over sort of how they look as a cohesive unit. You know, so the kinds of strategies they like to run, how they look, and how they're going to match up against the other two teams that they're going to have to play. Now, so what we're going to do for that is, luckily, all these teams have already played before, so we're going to go back and have a look at some of the games that we didn't get a look at in our analysis desk segments in those sets. So we've got straight up, starting off, we're going to be having Melbourne versus Brisbane, which those are our two semi-finalists, of course. And then we're going to move on to, we're going to talk about Melbourne primarily. We're going to look at the Melbourne versus Brisbane set. We're going to move into talking about Brisbane, look at the Brisbane versus Sydney set, and then we're going to go into talking about Sydney at the very end. So, the main thing that I've seen from Melbourne, and I think it's fairly obvious where we're going with this, is Shockwave. Now, we're talking about Shockwave in Melbourne for a couple of reasons. The Melbourne has what we call a 3-1 strategy. They have three players in one part of the map, one person on another part of the map. It's a fairly common idea in Splatoon. So if you don't sort of understand the reasoning behind that, pretty much if you split your team, then you're going to be without players in a certain part of the map. Now, if you split 2 and 2, if you just have two people go one place, two people go another place, and you run into four players with two of your players, they tend to just fall apart really quickly. So instead, if you go 3-1, then what happens is if the 3 meets the 4 that the enemy team has, then they don't quite fall apart so easily and they can actually hold off. And if the 1 meets the 4, then the 1 is just able to run away, and the 3 can push forward wherever they are. Like, you can sort of talk to each other in that sense. And that actually is how Melbourne plays. They have Shockwave doing one thing, and they have the rest of the team doing something else. And even though in some of these games we'll actually see, I think if we get to the Melbourne versus Sydney game later, we'll actually see some of what makes that kind of work out. On the other hand, we've also got Brisbane. So in this set, we've got Brisbane versus Melbourne. We're going to take a look at that. And Brisbane, by comparison, tends to run more of a, like, they'll sort of stay together as a team, with Murray and Neru generally being like that kind of impenetrable fortress, and then they just send out these waves of zombies at the enemy team. The zombies here being Alzi and whoever else they happen to be running. So the advantage of that strategy as compared to a 3-1 is, with a 3-1, it's kind of straight up. Like the 3-1, the 3 will generally like be very obvious about what they're doing, where they're going, kind of thing. And then the 1 has to be very sneaky. And if the 1 gets caught, or if the 3 gets steamrolled, which we've seen in some of these games actually. There was one Rainmaker game comes to mind where Shock went on a flank, and then the enemy team, I think it might have actually been in this set, if I'm not mistaken. Let me actually know, it was Anchovy Rainmaker, um, so it basically it worked against Melbourne because the 3 kind of fell apart too quickly. They weren't able to hold the line, and then Shock's flank came in way too late to actually stop the Rainmaker from just shoving forwards. I feel like that might have been Adelaide, actually. Melbourne versus Adelaide. Anyway, so the difference between that and the Brisbane thing is that Brisbane strategy is much more about using really strong defensive weapons like the Dynamo and Neru's Splitlings, and using that as sort of a base to launch these, zombie T-Techs at the enemy team. with the idea being that because the defensive line never like moves forward and is never expected to show themselves and be vulnerable, then these sort of T-Techs will like go out, and if they get a pick and they can snowball that, then they get a good push out of it. If they don't, no harm done, because they're just going to respawn, jump straight back in. Murray and Neru have plenty of warning to reposition if they have to. So
now you say you've pointed that out as Brisbane's and I think it's very, very accurate, the zombie attack. But you've also got teams like Sydney that have their skidder, who will do a similar thing. What is so different between those two squads that makes it work much better for Brisbane than it does for Sydney?
Yeah, so with Sydney, we'll get into the details of Sydney a little bit later once we've got through this game. But for the most part with Sydney, the difference is that they don't have that sort of that strong anchor of Murray and Neru. Right. So with Sydney, what you tend to see is instead 4 people kind of doing things to make plays and carry the game each individually. Whereas with Brisbane, it's more like you have Murray and Neru just kind of chilling and making sure that Brisbane never loses ground. And then they just send Alzi and Ray, or Alzi and Jay Sword, or whoever, in over and over and over again until something happens. And the difference is that with Skidder on Sydney, what you're sort of expecting is for Skidder to go in, maybe get a kill, maybe trade, but then someone else would have to go in with them to specifically get the kills in the fights that they start. Whereas with Brisbane, it's more like they're just sending expendable forces in, and then if the fight works out in their favor, they gain ground, and if it doesn't work out, then they don't lose anything, or it's difficult for them to lose things.
Okay, I see.
So the other thing to note about Brisbane is it's a little bit difficult to really understand exactly how they're playing, because they haven't really used their quote-unquote best lineup, aside from, I think, versus Adelaide. I know, not Adelaide, sorry. What was the second week match? Because they lost to Adelaide, right? Perth. It was versus Perth.
Yep.
Where they actually used all 3, and I think they just got a 9-0 or an 8-1 or something against Perth. It was quite impressive to watch. So we don't really know exactly how effective it's going to be with Brisbane. With Sydney and with Melbourne, both of them have used their best lineups fairly consistently. Whereas with Brisbane, we don't actually know what happens when you put all 3 of Murray, Alzi, and Neru in the same team, and then have Ray like free to do whatever, or Jay sort of will free to do whatever. So that's going to be really interesting to see in the semi-finals. So what we're going to look at the first game of Brisbane versus Melbourne right now, because I think what it shows is a good example of how Brisbane, so we've talked about this sort of impenetrable fortress of Murray and Neru. The difficulty with that is that it's a little bit tricky to execute. If the reason it works is because there is that gap between the enemy team and Murray and Neru. That is, when they send their zombie forces in, that creates a buffer, which then allows for Neru and Murray to have warning if they need to back up, or they know where people are coming from. They have time to sort of build specials. They have time to get some turf down while the enemy team is dealing with Alzi and Ray and Jay Sod and Will. So
yes.
Just to butt in, we did crown them Nurry, right, on the weekend.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, they're now called Nurry.
Okay.
So if you ever need to refer to them as a collective term, they're Nurry.
So they are now Nurry, okay.
They're now Nurry, yeah. And all the jokes that go along with that. And just to your point before, though, as you're saying, it helps that Murray and Neru both play pretty turf-heavy weapons, so they can do it in a pretty expedited fashion.
I think
rather than other midlines and backlines.
Yeah, it's sort of, the way I'd put it is that they have more freedom to focus on turf, right? They're not constantly going for kills. Right. So when the zombie forces are out doing their thing, they don't have to get any kills. They can just focus on painting the ground around them. Like Remix and Dynamo is okay at turfing. Remix is okay at turfing. There's certainly no Aerospray or L3 or whatever.
Yes.
But the difference is, and it's kind of like with Blob doesn't paint a huge amount. It's just that it's constantly painting. That's how it gets huge turf scores. Same with Nuri's weapon combination here. So what I wanted to look at this game, though, the reason I wanted to look at this game is because in this game we actually have a case of where this weakness is kind of shown, where if there isn't a buffer between Murray and Neru, which quite often happens when they're on the respawn, like if Murray goes down or if Neru goes down first, that means they respawn first when the rest of their team dies, right? So if they wipe but Murray dies first, Murray is first out of the respawn. Quick respawn can mess with that a little bit, but let's just say that for the sake of what we're about to see here, they're actually going to die off the start of the initial fight, pretty much, which means that there's no quick respawn to talk about. And that means that when Murray or Neru is first out of spawn, they have a choice to make. Do they go in first without that buffer and risk dying a second time and putting their team in an even worse position, or do they wait for their team to respawn so that they have that buffer, and in doing so give the enemy team enough time to potentially run the Rainmaker really far, or the objective really far, in this case Rainmaker. So what we're going to see is, I'm going to turn that down a little bit, it's a bit loud. So what we're going to see off this first fight is sort of fairly passive play, and you can kind of see this Nuri stack starting to work out for Brisbane. Like, they've got Melbourne just kind of painted into a corner a little bit here, but nobody's actually going down. And you can sort of see Murray goes down first, all right? So Murray's gone down to a combination of Pit and Shock, and now everyone's starting to fall apart. So Ray's coming in, Murray's coming in on the respawn, right? But they have to take first contact, right? So Murray is now fighting Shock directly. You could very easily see how this could fall apart, and in fact it does, because Sai is able to get on top of, on the trade on Murray, which then allows the Rainmaker to push even further up. And basically this whole thing is, like, this whole push comes about because of this thing that we've just been talking about, where the structure of Brisbane relies on having two people in front of Murray and Neru.
Yep.
So this is so it's very easy. It's very obvious. Oh, sorry, not obvious. It's very apt to say that the way, like, the weakest part of Brisbane's game is the first 30 seconds or so, where they don't have that kind of structure in place just yet. It's also the weakness of Brisbane is in their is off the respawn. If Murray goes down first, or if Neru goes down first. Mostly Murray. I think if Neru goes down first, it's okay because the remix is still fine close range, whereas the Dynamo, it's like, if you miss your first shot and you're on the front line, it's not good. So the other thing is, in this particular game, in this series in general, I think we actually saw that Sai's K-Rapid pick, I don't like the K-Rapid, I think it's a bad weapon. But in this case, you got K-Rapid versus Dynamo and versus Heavy Remix, right? It's kind of a good option. So, because it has the range, and it also is really good at sort of, as we see, like, when Murray was over here getting this kill, Murray was over here killing Shock, who was right here, Sai comes up here, and then as Murray is flicking against Shock, he can't kill Sai, and Sai is able to just go tap, 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 and kill Murray, and that sort of leads into this whole push to 4 points as we saw. Right. We also did see that Neru was the one who sort of came down here, and she was on the front lines as well, but she, because she has a remix and it's fairly easy to sort of just wind up a half charge and then shoot something that's in front of you, was able to actually turn around and save the Rainmaker. So now we see again this kind of, with the Rainmaker, Murray still does the same kind of thing, where he's kind of chilling, and then he's letting Ray and Will, and in this case Neru, also sort of run ahead. We've mentioned this Rainmaker idea before, of like having the Rainmaker just kind of chill and then let people run in, and then the Rainmaker, like, until you get some kind of opening, you just keep the Rainmaker as something that can't really be assailed. The idea being that, like, if someone tries to run at Murray and he's got the Rainmaker on this kind of ramp here, then he can just, like, shoot here with the Rainmaker and they can't advance forward. Like, they can't really come around this way. It takes too long, and he's got like 2 or 3 chances to get kills on them. This spot here for the Rainmaker is really, really good, and it's the same concept as what Brisbane does in just their usual gameplay, is to have someone like Murray or Neru standing on a obnoxious position like this, where even if people start to die, like say Will gets taken out here and then Goy like tries to come in, how can Goy realistically approach Murray when Murray has this kind of spot with a dynamo? So this strategy in Rainmaker is very much the way Brisbane likes to play as a whole. And of course, Murray does sort of give up his position. He kind of has to because of the Inkstorm, but yeah. So we just like we're gonna keep seeing stuff like this of like, okay, Ray just runs in, right, and yeah, he gets killed by Sai, but then there's someone to replace him, and then Neru's gonna replace them, and it's like by the time Melbourne has any kind of foothold on this defense, there's just too many people running at them, right? And we see sort of. I think this is actually why they get their push to 1 point. Spoiler alert: Brisbane does win this game, by the way.
Oh, come on!
We only saw that like 2 weeks ago. Haven't watched it yet.
It is interesting how they gain their ground quite slowly, but in like a deliberate kind of way.
Yeah, and
It's
they never
very
lose it
interesting to
once
watch.
they've got it.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think I even mentioned. I think this game I remember actually pointing this game out and saying like, after the first push, Brisbane never fell back behind this line until the very end of the game, because once they had the middle, they had Murray and Neru holding it down, and then Will and Ray were just constantly running in and making things happen.
Yep.
So you
And then worst case, if Will and Ray die, they got jumps back to Neru and Murray, who are already 3/4 up, holding their own.
Yeah, exactly. Right, like they get a pick, but now Murray and Neru, in this case Will, because he's grabbed the Rainmaker, are able to just like very slowly make it pain. Like you can see, Murray even jumps out, right? He even jumps from here back to here just to make it that much more painful for Melbourne to like. They've just spent, I think, what did they spend? Like an inkjet, and they threw a whole bunch of stuff at this part of the map, and now they have to get through here as well. It's like, how can they ever advance forward from this position?
Yeah, and you'll be pleased to know that Murray did this exact strat on Piranha Pit in the All-Star game against Link, trying to run Dynamo as well, and it played out exactly as we discussed last time, where it was whoever held that
on zones, wasn't it?
On zones, yep. Whoever held that conveyor held the game, had both zones painted, and then only someone who could break the stalemate made any difference in the game. So it wasn't a fluke, it wasn't a one-off. That's what Murray does, and that's what he's good at.
Yeah, I mean, we even mentioned that in the previous analysis, right? Like we see here.
Sorry, that's what I meant. Yes, yeah.
But I mean, Murray does play like that on pit zones. He even plays like it here. Like these ramps are notoriously good for dynamos. And you can even see, like, at this point, I think I'm not actually, like, Murray does this sometimes, and it's sort of like he's kind of flexing, I gotta feel, because this is he's just kind of running in.
He's pushing up, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what prompted him to do that, but
did he get that double?
He got a single, and
he got
earlier on.
He got a double over here, then he moved up and got a kill on Goy coming out of respawn. So.
Once you get a double, you might as well get a quad, right?
Yeah. Sort of, screw this, we're winning this
now
game.
You're thinking like me.
Yeah. But yeah, you can also, like, we didn't really see it a whole lot in this game just because of the nature of, like, Melbourne got this insane lead early and they tried to defend with it, which meant that they didn't really do the whole 3-1 thing quite as much. But you can sort of see straight away. What I mean by 3-1 isn't necessarily that, like, Shock is always on the opposite side of the map from his team or anything like that, because quite often we see that he does meet up with his team. It's just that usually what it means is that Shock will have one idea of what he wants to be doing, and then the rest of the team will kind of work together to do something different, usually concerning the objective. Right, so Shock will be thinking, okay, how do we get the objective from where it is to, like, further in? Like, who do I need to kill? Whereas the team is thinking, okay, what do we need to do to take control of the objective? Which then, when you take these things together, what will happen is the team will quite often get control of the objective just by using their specials and whatever. at around about the same time that Shock gets a crucial pick. And this doesn't happen in this map quite so much because on this map it's fairly narrow, right? There's sort of a choke point here where even if Shock tries to flank, where is he going to actually flank to? Right? Like if he comes through here, he's going to get spotted as soon as he walks out here. He's going to get spotted as soon as he goes in here. Like there's no real way for Shock to approach to make this 3-1 split happen. So that means that he's kind of reduced to, as I think we even see here, this is something that he does quite a lot in games where he's losing and it's kind of the end of the game, is he kind of tries to make these desperation plays, and he does in fact get Murray, and we see again, like, we may even see, like, this is where Brisbane starts to fall apart at the end of this game, is because they've lost Murray first up. Team does keep themselves together, sort of. Will tries to make a hero play. But we can also sort of see, like, so Shock, Sai is trying to go in with the baller, and Shock is thinking, no, I want to do something different. And then tries to, but unfortunately, like, he gets caught trying to, like, make this hero play because it's sort of like he's stuck at the end of the game. He can't really make it happen. So this is kind of the weakness of Melbourne in a way, is the fact that because this is so consistently their thing, when Shock actually has to do things, like, for example, play with Sai right here. Like, Sai's gone in with the baller. It's the perfect thing for a Nautilus to be following up on, because everyone's going to be worried about this baller, so Shock should absolutely be baiting the baller. But he doesn't do it because it's sort of his MO to ignore what the rest of his team is doing, or just play off the fact that his team is doing things. And then use that as kind of bait to get his quad kills. So you can kind of see, like, right here, he's more concerned with the fact that he wants to kind of go this way, and his team, the enemy team, is here, and he's kind of missed the fact that Sai's gone in with the ball. I suspect it's, like, he doesn't often make these kinds of mistakes, but it's kind of the end of the game, and they've got to make a clutch push in Rainmaker. It's really hard to do, so maybe a little bit slow.
Yeah.
Or a little bit anxious, perhaps. Anyway. So at this point, yeah, Brisbane kind of cleans up. Does this? Yeah, it does. Okay. So this was. Oh, hang on, I went forwards. I meant to go backwards. Okay, so again, we start off with this push with Murray getting taken down, and Will failing to get the kill on Goy. That was. I don't think the kill on Goy was particularly important. So even though Will kind of screwed that up, but we see here, like, Murray is the first line of defense again. Right, so Murray is the first one out. Neru's here as well. I think Neru is throwing a booyah bomb, because I think she jumped and then threw a booyah bomb.
What gave it away? Was it the multiple booyahs?
Maybe. Yeah. Also, just the fact that she's kind of standing in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, so booyah bomb does stall out. But, like, you can kind of see how Murray can't really advance forward because he has to have someone between, right, him and, say, Silaris. And if Sai is here with the Rapid Blaster, then Murray's not going to have a good time. And we see it straight away. So this is the difficulty for Brisbane, is that they are going to be in situations like this. This isn't something that you can just ignore. This isn't something you can, like, be better than. You, just by the nature of this game, if you die first, you respawn first, which means that you're the first line of defense no matter what your weapon is. All right. Now, if your weapon relies on having people between you, or teammates between you and the enemy team, and you can't have that because you're first on respawn, then this situation is going to happen, and there is nothing you can do to stop that from happening. All you can do is accept the situation and understand what that situation requires of you, which I think Murray does quite well most of the time. And you have to make that choice between, like I said, do you stay back in spawn and wait for your team to come out with you, and in doing so give the enemy team a little bit more time to push up? You could potentially do that with Neru stalling out with a booyah bomb, or do you actually run in and risk it? And if you risk it, then what happens if you go down? Because now you've gone down first again, and if your team falls apart a second time, they're already at your base about to push in. You actually just lose the game if that happens a second time. So it's a really tough position to be in. This is sort of why anchoring in general is a really tough thing. Like, it feels really good when you've got that kind of structure, but then as soon as that structure falls apart, just because of the nature of this game and how respawns and picks and whatnot work, then at some point you're going to have to deal with a situation like this, and that is where comps with, like, dedicated anchors quite often fall apart. And of course, Brisbane having 2 dedicated anchors, mid-range though they may be, is definitely very vulnerable to this situation. So, luckily, like you can kind of see, they
Ray
are able
goes
to,
big.
yeah, they're able to stave it off just barely. But you can also see how that could have gone so much worse.
Oh,
Easily.
right. That was Melbourne's game to win just then.
Yeah.
That was, you could probably break down that fight if you looked at all their perspectives and see who they were and weren't looking at the right times. Because that was really close.
Yeah.
They had the numbers, they had the positioning.
Yeah, like imagine if everyone just looks at Will right now. Right?
Oh, he gone.
He's 200% dead. Unfortunately, Sai isn't a ball. This is kind of like the K-Rapid thing. Is like you watch things happen around you and you're just like, I can't kill that quickly enough.
Right, unless my aim's dead on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, even then, like it's tough.
Right.
And now Sai is unfortunately in a close range fight against an NZAP, and yeah. So like this situation here is very very dicey. It could go either way, and in Brisbane's defense, like they've already pushed it to 1. Like even at this point, the game is still pretty tough for Melbourne to close out because like they've always got the possibility of someone coming out of spawn and just killing the Rainmaker the second time.
Mid dunk. Yeah.
Yeah, they literally need to dunk it so they can actually kill the person as they're trying to dunk. Like with a dino, it happens all the time. So yeah, this is sort of this is the first of the 2 games. We're gonna move on to what was it? I believe it was Manta TC.
Okay, so is this a Melbourne victory here?
It is.
It is a C.
Hang on. No, I've got my wrong set.
Why isn't this the video I wanted? I see.
It's game 9, I think.
Yeah, we're doing game 9 on this one. All right.
It's on.
Yep. Yeah, the Manta TC game was Sydney versus Melbourne.
No one's gonna let Brisbane play Manta TC. That was.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, why would it be Manta with Melbourne winning on Manta? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna move on to clams here. So we've actually kind of like I mentioned before that one of the things with Melbourne's playstyle is that they've got a bit of a weakness to decisive play, which is to say that kind of like the Adelaide game where Adelaide on Anchovy Rainmaker, we looked at this a couple of weeks ago. They grab the Rainmaker and just run it forwards, and Shock is on a flank, and like this is the kind of decisiveness that beats 3-1 plays on defense, right? Because if you have the resources to steamroll the 3, then they can't stall out for long enough for the 1 to come around on the side and clean up and alleviate the pressure. So the weakness that Melbourne has is in this decisiveness, and quite often decisiveness is sort of the difficulty for these draft teams that we've got. I think every team has some issue with it, including Melbourne, obviously. It's just that I think with Brisbane, the difficulty is that their decisiveness comes down to they're constantly, they've got people who are running in constantly, and they've got people who are chilling constantly. There's no like, do we all push up? No, everyone knows their roles, and everyone is sort of used to the idea of, okay, if we need to push up, then like if Murray and Neru know that they have to push up, then they push up, and if they don't need to push up, then they don't. Like there's no sense of like everyone needs to run up and make something happen here. So instead, they can focus on taking out Shock, or in this case, Goose. Now, this is a Melbourne win. This was a fairly decisive game as well. And I think, I must admit, this game is a little bit awkward because I think at this point, Melbourne hadn't won this set, I don't think. But Brisbane had already won the series, so it's kind of like this is game 9. Melbourne's basically just saving face at this point, which did end up mattering, I think. And the thing with this game, I would say that Will probably shouldn't be on the junior, because, like we've said, like what we need here out of Brisbane is 2 people to kind of hold the fort, and then 2 people to run in and make things happen. And the junior is not really going to fit into that. It sort of, I think we had this discussion at some point with, I think Brisbane versus New Zealand, or maybe it was one of the games where I just remember Neru like running in to make things happen because Will was like on the tower or something, and in this case it doesn't work out super well because the remix is good when it's like just chilling here, but if the remix has to actually go in and make things happen on this map, there's too many tight angles to worry about, and it's really
Yes.
difficult to So I definitely think that this game quite literally came down to if Will was on an NZAP with or a T-Tech or something, then they probably would have been fine. But for the sake of just understanding why, like, the junior can't be the pick for Will with Brisbane because he has to go in to make this comp work, and if he can't go in because he's got a bloody junior, then of course it's going to work out poorly for them.
Mm-hmm. That's a good note, Will, if you are floating around.
Um,
Oh,
so
and also, sorry, we've just had a question from Mr. MVP, co-MVP, Geo.
yeah,
What is generally the best setup to run? 3-1, 2-2, or is it a rock paper scissors type thing,
it's
or is
there
it
isn't
map
really a
dependent?
best setup. The
Probably
3-1
depends on the
split.
team, doesn't it?
Yeah, it depends on a lot of things. So Camp Triggerfish, you go 2-2, not because there's very little danger of the enemy team going for 4-0. If the enemy team splits 4-0 on Camp Triggerfish, which is to say that they don't split at all, then they retake one zone, but they can't retake the other one. So it ultimately they have to go into a 2-2 split to take the map. And then the most difficult situations on Camp Triggerfish are quite often when the enemy team has 4 people shooting at your spawn, because now they've reunified their forces and you can't get to the zones at all. Right, so that's an example where 2-2 is ideal. 3-1 is a split where and this does play into the maps as well, right? So with a 3-1 split, then what you've got is like if you can't make plays as the one, right? So if you're on a map like Port Mackerel and you can't really flank because every avenue is being watched, like Walleye Warehouse is kind of an example of that. All these really narrow maps where, for example, Shock can't just run in on some unwatched angle and then get 3 kills. Those are maps where the 3-1 split starts to fall apart and you need to go a bit more Deathball. Deathball being sort of... Actually, Deathball is a kind of 4-0, or just group plays. I
Yeah,
keep saying 4-0.
a swarm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it depends on the map, depends on the weapons that you are most comfortable playing. So, for example, if you have a bunch of players who play mid-range stuff and you try to run like a rushdown strat with people, like just like even a rushdown happens to be the thing that you should be doing on that map, like it's a Rainmaker game or something like that. Like on this map is rushdown. Like this map is very rushdown because the goals are so close together and it's really easy to get around with all this verticality, like blocking off lines of sight. So you always have the advantage with your short range weapons. In this scenario, you would want to go kind of deathbally. But if you don't have people who know how to exploit what makes Deathball good, then Deathball isn't good for you. You have to go to a strat that works for you as a team, and this is sort of why Brisbane will quite often pick this 2-2 kind of, or this kind of double anchor with zombies strategy, and it will just work no matter what the map is. Not because not because the strat is good, but because Brisbane is good with the strat. And then Melbourne has done the same thing with the 3-1, and even though sometimes they'll it's a lot easier to shut down a 3-1 if you know how to counter shock, right? Like it comes down to, okay, can we counter shock? If we can, we win. And it's a lot easier for Brisbane to counter that because they have the kind of comp that does that. But ultimately, it's good because this is the style that suits Melbourne best. And it's not that like 3-1 is best. It's not that 2-2, like it's not that any of
Sure.
these things are the best. It's just this is like 3-1 has this weakness to decisiveness, where if you push one part of the 3-1, then the other one kind of becomes useless, right? If you shut down the flanker, then it's super easy. But these are just trade-offs, right? Because the other thing is, if the enemy team deathballs and doesn't actually recognize where Shock is in time, or even Goose, like sometimes Goose is the one, right? Which is sort of why I think Melbourne tends to play a little bit better when they have Goose, is because they have that kind of trade between Shock and Goose, and like Shock can actually merge back into the 3, and Goose can go do his own thing with a carbon roll or whatever. It's just the characteristics of the style. That's all that it is. There is no strongest, there is no weakest, there is no like it's just this is how they play out, and this is what happens when you mash these two things against each other.
Right. So if you decide to run a 3-1, for example, on a map, and you see a 2-2 run at you, should you worry about changing your positioning at all, or should you just continue to run your 3-1 and then just, the 3 try and gang up on the 2 and the 1 try and survive?
Yeah, I mean that's basically it, right? Like you recognize what they're doing, and then you understand. Okay, well, 3-1 versus 2-2. What's going to happen is the 3 is going to overpower the 2 because that's a very advantageous fight compared to the 3 versus the 4, which is only slightly advantageous for the 4. The 1 is able to partition off fights in a 1v2. It's a lot easier to like isolate one player from the other. So the 1 can actually quite often win the 1v2, whereas a 1 versus a 3, fat chance, right? So like, and this is kind of why, like, I will say, like, I just said that there's 2-2 splits. It's not about which is good and which is bad. It's just that like 2-2 splits are a little bit awkward because you need to, like, with certain weapons you can make it work, right? Like this is kind of a 2-2 split that Brisbane has going on, but the difference is they've got a 2-2 split with a Dynamo and a Remix, who are both kind of have really good matchups against certain kinds of enemy weapons, and then they have these guys just kind of running in and making things happen, right? So this is a 2-2 split, but it's not just like 2 people go here, 2 people go here. No, it's more like 2 people here, 2 people here. It's a very different kind of thing, right? So it's like not even all 3 1s and 2 2s are the same, right? So it's you don't even just the point that I'm trying to make
complicated question. Yep.
Is you don't think about what beats what. You think about what aspects of how each aspect of your positioning, your playstyle matches up against each aspect of the enemy team. It's nuanced, right? It's not just 3-1 beats 2-2, right? Because we actually see in this set, this is a 2-2 split from Brisbane. They beat Melbourne, who runs 3-1. It's not about which strat beats which. It's about which aspects of each strat are strong against which aspects of the other strat, and whether one team can exploit that better than the other team. That is what winning games is all about. So,
yes, right. No, that makes sense. And just like, I suppose anything, you're trying to find the advantage in this game.
Yeah.
And however you find that, whatever you're doing is what you do.
Like, I'll put it this way. If Brisbane comes up against... when Brisbane and Melbourne are going to square off in a couple of days' time, what's going to happen is Melbourne is going to run 3-1 and Brisbane is going to run 3-2. If they try to change their strats at this point, it's kind of like studying on the last day before an exam. Not really going to help you all that much.
Right, yeah. It's going to... Yeah, fair enough.
It's too little too late.
Yeah, right? You end up as a graphic designer. Yes, understood.
Yes. So what they should be doing is understanding how their strat works, how Melbourne's strat works, and then trying to understand where their strengths lie and where their weaknesses lie. In this case, for example, I would say that one of the things that Melbourne has to address is how does Shock get away from Murray and Neru, right? Because these two are going to have their eyes locked on Shock constantly because, like I said before, part of what happens when these guys run in is that Murray and Neru are able to just kind of chill and just keep an eye on the map and paint up and whatever. And if that's when Shock tries to make something happen, then he's going to get seen by 2 people who have superior weapon matchups against him, right? Even with his Nautilus, right? Nautilus wins a lot of matchups, but Dynamo and Remix, not so much. And meanwhile, Melbourne needs to look at this and say, like, okay, well, we just said that. Melbourne needs to look at this and say, how do we get past Murray and Neru? And then Brisbane needs to look at this and say, all right, we know how to deal with Shockwave, so what happens if, like, how does he potentially address this problem? And then also, how do we deal with what happens when, like, Goose and I think Sai start going ham, or Goy starts going ham, you know? Like, what happens with this three? How do we put two people up against a group of three and come out on top, right? Because if this constant, like, running at the enemy team with two people has a weakness, it's that, yeah, like, it's not really bad for them if they die, but at the same time, if they all die at once and Murray and Neru can't, like, get trades, then this isn't like two versus three isn't really going to work out super well very often against if the enemy team is grouped correctly. So it's each team has problems they need to solve, and that's why we're going over these things in the manner we like. We're just taking a top down look, I guess, at these teams and understanding how they play, because this is I'm hoping that as viewers, you guys will be able to actually see some of these strategies playing out and understanding what's going on. And the players should be able to look at what I'm like pointing out and say, "Oh, we need to address this. Like, we need to think about this," right? Because at this point, you've got all the VODs available to you to study what the enemy team likes to pick and what they like to run and all that sort of stuff. But what you really need to understand is how you're going to win. How you are going to put together a winning strategy, which requires a bit more introspection than just a bit of like occasional VOD review. So,
right. So, in saying that Murray and Neru, this match in particular, they're not. Their weapons aren't super suited for this rushdown comp.
Well, we can take a look at what Goose does here, right? So Goose is going to get a kill on Murray pretty quickly. Notice how, like, obviously there's people coming out of respawn, but Murray is taking first contact against Goose, right? And even though this can favor the Dynamo, the Tri-Slosher is definitely able to strike if the Dynamo misses a shot, which I think is exactly what happens here, right? So Murray reveals himself, doesn't realize Goose is there, gets taken out. How can Will, who's a junior, ever deal with Goose, right? Goose turns this kill onto Murray into a snowball where he gets a kill on Will, and then Ray is isolated because the rest of the team is pushing up behind them. And then Neru is kind of stuck having to deal with this K-Rapid. And then that turns into a really, really strong push from Melbourne. Right? This comes apart not because... this doesn't come apart because Murray lost a 1v1. It comes apart because there is no... Like, this is a situation that Murray is trying to avoid, that Brisbane is trying to avoid in the first place. This is why you need the buffer, because things like this can very easily happen if you allow someone to get close enough to the Dynamo without being pushed away. Right? This situation comes about because there is no, like, NZAP. We got a junior here instead of an NZAP. Like, there is no NZAP providing that buffer. There is, like, Ray isn't able to go in right now. And so this whole play, it's not that Murray screwed up in that fight against Goose. I mean, yeah, he arguably did, but the reason that fight even took place in the first place is because Brisbane's strat doesn't work when they have three people who like to hang back. And you can kind of see here again, like, we're now dealing with, like, how can Will win 1v1? Like, even if Will, he's got a junior, how can he win 1v1s? You know? Like, it's only at the very end here where Melbourne's just kind of going and running everything into the basket in a hopes of knocking out that Brisbane finally stabilizes, and it's due in no small part to the fact that Murray was able to actually just keep himself alive for long. Murray and Neru actually were able to keep themselves alive long enough to sort of stabilize a bit. And even then, like, Neru goes down, Ray goes down again. Will kind of has to clean up with a junior again. We've already mentioned how it's a problem, and now Goose gets a double kill trade. So it's like Brisbane never really gets going on this map, and it's. Yes, you can point to individual plays, and by the way, we see the classic K-Rapid problem of, oh no, something is running at me. Sorry, I'm talking about three things at once here. I know it's...
it's all right. Yeah,
try to keep up.
K-Rapid needs to be...
Yeah,
yeah, sure.
This is what happens to K-Rapids.
So, would you say Brisbane should not pick this map?
I think this map can get awkward because of how easy it is to close the gap.
Right.
So I think it's probably still fine. Like Dynamo and Remix on this map are very obnoxious. Like you put one here and one here, and one here and one here, and it's how do you know? And then this guy moves up here, and then like this guy moves up here, and then is able to get around here. It's really easy to sort of get these multi-stage kind of advancements going, which is what Brisbane likes to do. But at the same time, you could very easily see how if they keep their eyes off the ball for a moment, then Loose Goose comes in from the side and gets a double kill. Because the distance here is so short, and it's so difficult to actually see people because there's just so many ledges, blocking sight, and like you're only really exposed if you go like this. You're only really exposed in like this part here. Once you're around the corner here, if someone's on the stack, they don't see you. Like if they're looking over here, then you just duck across, and they don't see you, then you're on top of them in no time at all. Whereas a lot of maps, like there's a little bit more space to work with, and this is also why you need that sort of extra player up in front, because then if, say, Alzi was here, and Loose Goose is trying to go in for a flank here, well, he meets Alzi, and then Alzi dies, or maybe he gets the kill, who knows. But it doesn't matter, because now Murray knows that Goose is here, and now this flank is locked down, you can't go here.
And if the fight goes long enough, it's going to be Murray's advantage anyway.
Exactly. So
even if no one kills each other, yeah.
So this is... The map is definitely not bad for Brisbane, and it should even work out quite well. Like what we're looking for in good Brisbane maps is basically the ability to sort of like we saw in the Piranha Pit game. Like you start from your base and then you advance forward into like these kinds of positions, and you just lock this down, and then you advance forward, you lock this down, and you advance forward, and like eventually you lock their base down, right? And the whole time, like you lock down here, and then you send your zombies in, and then like the zombies eat some brains, and then suddenly you've got you can move your fortress of your Nuri fortress up to these kind of advanced positions, and you do it again. Like it's this sort of repeated cycle that leads to the kinds of consistent plays that we saw against Melbourne in that first game we looked at. So
Nuri Fortress is hilarious.
Nuri Fortress, also Fort Nuri.
I think you kind of mentioned it earlier, but the longer, narrower maps, I assume it's easier to do that buffering.
Yes.
On those maps.
Yeah, we looked at the other week. We looked at Port. Right. We mentioned this. Where Melbourne brought Brisbane to Port Mackerel, and I said this is a really bad counterpick because what Murray, like, look at this, you can actually see on the map exactly where Murray wants to go, right? Like, it's so very clear and obvious that this is high ground against a Dynamo. Like, he's just gonna hop on the islands across. It's so easy for, and not only that, but when you've got two people running forwards, and you're trying to do a 3-1, like, where is Shock going to flank from? If he goes here, then Murray and Naru are both sitting, like, all of these angles are watched. There's no way in for Shock. And then they advance forward, and there's still no way in for Shock. And meanwhile, these guys are just like, the remaining three for Melbourne are just like, what the hell will we do? Because we've got a Dynamo on one side, and we've got a Remix on the other side, and then we've got these bloody zombies just appearing out of every scrap of ink that we leave unsupervised, and, like, how can we possibly win this? Like, this is Brisbane. Like, this is a good map for Brisbane. Yes, it's a bad map for Dynamo, but like we said the other week, Murray knows how to play Dynamo well enough that he can make this map work. And you have to step up to that, right? So.
And I guess the shorter, wider maps are just going to suit Melbourne as well with the flanking options. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how that plays out on the weekend.
Was this a map that... I think this is a map that Melbourne... Yeah, it looks like a map that... Actually, no, this is a map that Brisbane won. Actually, no, because... So this one is sort of a map where you would expect Shock to be able to, like, come in through here constantly, but this is also, like, the only option, so it kind of gets obvious after a while.
Yeah, and the uninkable to get up as well.
Yep.
Is a pain.
Yeah, like you can get up it fairly quickly, but it's still like you're very exposed in that moment. What was the one that Melbourne did well on? This one. Yeah, so this wasn't a particularly good push, but you see where Shock dies here. Like look where he's going. He's just booking it up this slick, right?
Yeah,
So
hoping his run speed ends up gets him up
yeah,
there.
and you can kind of see the issue, right? This is what the 3-1 is all about. Yes, the Fort Nari does claim Shock as a victim here, but at the same time, the push is coming in from the top side. So yes, they focus on Shock. He's armored. He takes a while to die, and then what can Will do against like 2 to 3 people pushing the tower? This is sort of the advantage, right? So Shock sometimes dies, and then the team pushes up as a result. Sometimes the team dies, and then Shock pushes in and kills multiple people as a result. Like it's a trade off between the two, where if you focus too hard on this guy, these guys steamroll. If you focus too hard on these guys, this guy comes out of nowhere and gets a triple kill. This is sort of the 3-1 as it ought to be, and you could also see earlier on in this push, Shock was very much part of the team here. Like he was definitely not off doing his own thing. It's only right now where he decides to actually make something happen, and it's because, okay, we got 2 down. We know where the third guy is. Neru's probably on the respawn, so I can actually just go and make something happen here. And if I catch people on the respawn, then the tower pushes up and we got the lead. So even though like this kind of falls apart in the end a little bit, like it's still an okay push. It's not the best push ever. But at this point, like now Shock's dead, the push kind of falls apart. But at the same time, they got like 20 points out of Shock doing that. So,
Yep.
it's not even like, yes, the push dies when Shock dies, but Shock got them 23 points, so it's okay. So, and keep in mind, I'm not trying to say that Shock is the only reason Melbourne's winning. Like you could have Goose do this or Sai do this. It's the strat that Melbourne is running means that Shock is going to have the spotlight.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've seen that as well. No, in no way. It's easy to simplify and say, yeah, the team or Shock, but within the team fights, there are intricacies that they're winning and losing.
Yeah, because I mean, Goose, I think top fragged in pretty much every game he played. Like he was very much outperforming Shock on a game by game basis when he was actually playing. But he was part of the 3, so it was kind of like, well.
Yeah, well, good job, team.
Good work, Like
yeah, good job, entire team.
Aside from that one game where he went ham with a carbon roller against Sydney, who were just tilted out of their minds.
26, yeah.
That was like, for the most part, Goose would get like 17 kills, and then it would be like, oh, he got 17 kills. Well, that's a surprise. Whereas Shock is like the camera's on him the whole game because Auto Spectator just loves going for flankers. And then I think we even had a bit of Twitter back and forth about this, didn't we? Like. Anyway,
A few comments came through, yes.
But yeah, so that's Brisbane and Melbourne. We're going to move on to Sydney now. So we're going to look at. I think we're looking at Melbourne versus. Yeah, we're looking at Melbourne versus Sydney. And we'll sort of focus a bit more on Melbourne, but we'll also start to bring Sydney into the mix. And now, this was. Let me just find the video here. It's a little bit further down in my folder. Where is it?
Just while you're looking for that,
There it is.
Goose actually, if you look at a stats per game, he actually's like second in KA per game. So, yeah, you're right.
Or behind Latias?
Behind Shock,
Oh,
actually.
behind Shock, okay.
Yeah, so.
All right. Sorry, KA per game, not KD per game. Yep.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so now we've mentioned with Brisbane and Melbourne, so Melbourne is kind of a 3-1 strat. Brisbane is kind of I call it sort of turtling and zombie strat at the same time. Like zombie strat is a thing that goes all the way back to Splatoon 1. It's what the Japanese teams used to call the quick respawn spam stuff. But then you're also turtling up a bit and you're kind of playing defensively and then waiting for an opening to advance forward, which is really good stuff, actually. I don't think we really see too many teams do that. It's usually like a single anchor and then everyone like is going ham in front of that, which is a different kind of 3-1 split as well. But Sydney is a bit more freeform. Now, this is obviously week 1, so it's a little bit harder to just sort of say that this is Sydney's final form. But at the same time, we do see a bit more of like what makes Sydney tick, which is that they, instead of having I think we mentioned before. So Sydney, what they tend to do is more of like everyone tries to make plays at the same time, and it's
yes,
it's not I know we were saying that we don't want to be judging strategies, but it's not the greatest strategy. But the difference is that with Sydney, it's a good way of sort of bludgeoning the enemy team and like winning unconvincingly, but still winning. Which I think describes the way Sydney's been going. Right, they're 4-1, but at no point have they really been convincing in their games. Like they beat Brisbane, but it wasn't convincing. They lost to Melbourne by like one game, and
Yeah.
I had my wires crossed a bit. I thought that they actually lost because of Silem's disconnect, but it was actually they kind of did, but it was more because they couldn't use Silem from that point on because they didn't want to risk him disconnecting again. But they actually just won the set where he disconnected, so that's not an issue. But like with Sydney, what I see is basically just a whole bunch of capable 1v1 players, and if they get their 1v1s, which they quite often will, then they can just do whatever they want. Like they'll just do whatever they want, but it works out because they're all good, you know.
Yeah, okay.
Um,
It's not an optimized level of play for all their individual mechanics as far as team play goes, but it works because they're slightly advantageous in every
Yeah,
1v1.
it's kind of like if you just put four solo queue heroes into a team, right? Where
Right.
everyone's kind of used to baiting their team a little bit and kind of
Yeah.
keeping themselves alive at the expense of their team, with the exception of Skidder. Um, and I say that because Skidder just runs in with Tetris.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
not
he
blaming
keeps
him.
himself dead. That's his
Yeah, so
that's
it's
the
kind
job.
of like what we kind of see is we'll just let this play. Um, what we see is it's not so much that they have any particular split or strat going on, uh, and it's not as though they're like making any particular shot calls. It's more like, okay, if Skidder and Goy fight right now, Skidder's probably going to win that fight. Sometimes Goy will win. Most of the time Skidder will win, and the same is true across the map. Um, with the possible exception of Low, but then the thing with Low is that Low will be like he's not bad in a fight. We saw him with that one clip where he won a 1v1 against Shock and then started squid bagging until he died. Um, but Low like will pick a weapon, kind of like the Blob here, and it will be a weapon that has a game plan. So in this case, just pen get a ton of suction rushes, and he'll stick to that game plan really well. So he actually complements this. Like when you got three people running in, and then Lowe's just handling the objective, or Nereza is helping with the objective, it means that Skidder and Geo and Cookie and Silem and even Nereza, when he's on a really good charger map, have all the freedom to just go ham. It's like having multiple shocks who just ignore the objective and just run in and cause chaos and get triple kills and all that sort of stuff. And it's really difficult, even though you'll win games because they'll sometimes overextend. They'll give you openings to make really good plays, really good pushes rather. At the same time, most of the games that's not going to happen. You're just going to lose like the 60-40. The 60% where they win is going to be enough for them to win most sets, and therefore, and most sets and most games in those sets, therefore, the match. And that's why they look unconvincing, and yet they are 4-1. And arguably could have been 5-0. So, yeah. Well, let's play it, and like we see Skidder and Goy going at it over here, but like Skidder, in a remarkable show of restraint, doesn't actually go ham for this kill on Goy because they're getting 2v1. But what we're seeing is like, I'll just let this play out because there's, yeah. So like Geo is kind of baiting and waiting, right? So Goy goes in to fight Skidder, kind of overextends, and then Geo comes in and pairs up and takes him down. Shock, meanwhile, has got a kill on Nereza, but now Shock is like Geo is able to come in and just like instantly kill Lob, and then keeps himself alive long enough to reinitiate on Shock, and then wins that 1v1 as well, right? So like just all across the map, there's just 1v1s happening. Where, like in this case, you could argue that the Lob and Shock right here were a 2v1, and I mentioned before that when it's a 2v1, the one can sometimes isolate individual players. And this is an example of that, where Lob is going up the wall, so he's not really going to be in any fighting shape. So Geo just gets the instant kill on him, and then Shock has to react to that. Doesn't react in time because the kill was too quick. Geo's around the corner, and I need to change colors. And then and then he's able to reinitiate on Shock with an advantageous fight and takes him down. So this is the kind of thing that really skilled 1v1 players can do. I need to actually use yellow on this, right? It's this color combination. So this is the sort of thing that skilled 1v1 players do, and this is the sort of thing that Sydney does across the map the entire game. Sometimes they will all die and give you a way in. And when they do that, sometimes they'll throw their games in doing so. But a lot of the time, this is not going to happen in sufficient severity to give you a game win. So we see here, like, Skidder and Geo, like, Geo's sort of had to cross the entire map just to play with Skidder, and even now is sort of, like, hesitating, thinking, maybe I don't want to actually go in and help too much with that. Skidder's just, like, Skidder actually probably doesn't know what's going on in the middle of the map, and just is focused on the fact that, oh, there's two people here, I'm just going to keep shooting them until they die. Meanwhile, like, we see on the top side, okay, well, we've got a kill, and the Reza got a kill, good work. And now, like, we've got everyone sort of rejoining. I think at one point in this game, Skidder ends up, like, just running all the way into the enemy team's base just to get a 3v1. Just to get 3v1 and instantly die, but it actually kind of works out because it gives the team space to, like, get more points on the objective. And you can kind of see here, like, again, Geo dies here to Shock in this 1v1 that was kind of, Shock was able to get that 1v1 win, but then Skidder's jumped in, and now you got to deal with Skidder, and you've just lost Shock. So it's like, just constantly, you get an edge by winning a 1v1, but then someone else comes in who is equally capable, and it's like, now what do we do?
Yeah, I see. Hey, going back to what you were saying before with the Skidder up on the bottom, taking the 2v1, maybe not paying attention to mid. Does he need to, knowing that he is taking more aggro than he is giving, kind of thing? He knows that he has two people focused on him. Therefore, there is either another death and it's only a 3v4, which is unfortunate, or it's a 4v2 somewhere else, a 3v2 somewhere else.
Yeah, it's sort of like, and this is sort of what I was saying about Low and why Low sort of fits the team quite well, is that because Low is, like, got the objective on lock, then Skidder can do that kind of thing freely. It'd be different if, and also you got Nereza as well. It's kind of similar, actually, to the Brisbane thing, just in this particular game, because you got Low and Nereza kind of holding the back, and then Geo and Skidder just sort of do their own thing. And I'm sure, I don't think Skidder actually had no idea what was going on. I think it's just sort of like Skidder's more focused on. But yeah, just the fact that they have a lock on the objective because their team is handling that for them means that they can go and do those kinds of things where they're on the bottom side of the map, just occupying a couple of players, especially Lob, because Lob is sort of the junior. He's the guy who's going to be quite often trying to run onto the objective and start painting it, sort of thing. So.
Right. So in that particular scenario, what Skidder was doing, knowing that he had to creating a player advantage around the map somewhere else, that he was okay to keep engaging. Not really engaging, but just kind of baiting and playing with his food.
Yeah,
their food. Sorry.
What was I saying? Oh yeah. So the difficulty with Sydney is pretty much just it comes down to, like, they have enough of a 1v1 advantage that they can consistently win their sets. We've already seen that because they're 4-1 and very close to 5-0. But at the same time, the difficulty with Sydney is how do they actually make that into a consistent kind of thing? We saw them beat Brisbane, but Brisbane was playing, like, quite often without Murray or Neru. Sorry, without Alzi or Neru. I think against Brisbane, they actually... Yeah, sorry, against Sydney, Brisbane actually just ran, like, Murray, J-Sod, Will, and Ray. And then occasionally Alzi. Like, it was... I think Neru played, like, 1 or 2 games. Right, so we don't even know how Sydney matches up against Brisbane, and even that was relatively close.
I think it was 6-3 or something.
It was 6-3, but it was like Brisbane completely upended their strategy to make that comp, right? Because instead of having their double anchor, they've got, and you could argue Will, but Will isn't really an anchor. He's just someone who plays passively. So you've got Murray and kind of Will, and then, like, you're sending 2 people in to just but then like Will can't defend himself because he doesn't have that weapon advantage. It's complicated. So we don't actually have any idea how Brisbane and Sydney look when they fight against each other. We just know that Brisbane lost to Sydney when they played their sort of without their strategy, you know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Not the starting lineup.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even that they didn't play their best players. They literally upended their entire strategy just to make sure everyone got their games in. Like,
right,
it's and in doing so it was like even then they still looked pretty good in a lot of those games. This is the thing I mentioned before, by the way, which we sort of got a bit distracted, but like Skidder is free to do things like this, right? So I think I actually mentioned in week 1 of this support desk that what Skidder did here is on one hand feeding, but also it exposes shock. Like you can see, like this is the point I think I made, is that it exposes shock. And now people actually know where shock is. So this kind of playmaking, right, where you've got Skidder, you've got Geo, you've got Cookie, you've got Silent, you've got Nereza, and you've got Low, all kind of able to handle shock and all thinking about like, okay, what do I do in this situation? Where can they come from? Whatever. And they're all thinking about where shock could potentially be. They're definitely in a position to catch shock out a lot of the time if they're fighting against Melbourne. Against Brisbane, it might be a little bit trickier. Like, I think that against Brisbane, it's going to be a lot harder because this kind of play, instead of needing 3 people to deal with Skidder doing this or Geo doing this, they just need Murray, right? Or they just need Nehru, who's going to have the advantageous weapon matchup, which is a key thing, by the way.
Okay.
They have the advantageous weapon matchup against the Tetras, right? There's 2 things here that are a little bit awkward against Tetras. The K machine, sorry, the Neo machine is okay against them. The ballpoint is okay against them, sort of. The Junior has no chance in hell. So they kind of all have to group up and kill Skidder. But if you've just got a Dynamo, Tetra is like, what the hell do I do against a Dynamo? And so Skidder just gets stopped dead. And then when Skidder gets stopped dead, then they kind of get stuck in middle, and the rest of the, like, they get stuck, and then they're like, oh, hang on, now Alzy's coming in from behind and is about to shoot me in the back. Now what do I do? Meanwhile, on the other side of the map, you know, Gio's tried to go in and is starting to tangle with Neru, and then Ray just appears out of nowhere and sharks Geo. So it's like, it's a lot easier, I think, for Brisbane to catch Sydney in their sort of individualistic playmaking kind of thing, and turn that into an advantage. The difficulty for Brisbane will be in the maps where that's harder to do, right? So Sydney in particular has what I call, it's a kind of accidental teamwork where if everyone's kind of doing the same thing just because they all think that they all individually think it's a good idea, which I think we'll see. Like this game, we can sort of move on to the next game, honestly. This game we're looking at, oh yes, this is the one. So this is actually not an example of that. This is what I was wanting to look at. This, I didn't say in the, we weren't going to look at this game, but I just want to use this game as an example of what I'm talking about. So on this map, we'll go to the part where Sydney's winning. So on this part, on this sort of thing, like you can see, firstly, everyone's grouped up here for Sydney. This is wrong color again. This grouping is somewhat accidental, in the sense that it's happening organically. It's happening because the objective needs to be taken control of, and everyone is sort of focusing on the objective. And then, as the game progresses, Sydney will sort of organically, by the same kind of logic, move up into this part of the map and take control of it. Right? So we don't have people sort of splitting off into every different direction. Everyone only has one way to go, or one obvious way to go, so they go there, and they're all sort of working off each other organically. They aren't organizing, hey, let's push 3 people in. Everyone is individually coming to the conclusion of, let's all, like, I'm going to go in here, and oh, hey, my teammate's here too. Fancy that. And this happens, like, you can sort of see it here as this play develops. So you can see Skidder and Geo are both going in different directions, but where are they going to end up? Right here, right? Or maybe they go up on the wall or something like that. But like you can see, Geo and Skidder both had different ideas, but they arrive at the same location. This is the kind of organic teamwork I'm talking about.
Right.
So interesting, because if I look at, say, from Brisbane's point of view, they're going to play Melbourne, who they want to try and keep together so that they can locate shock and keep a narrow maps. But then if they go into the grand final against Sydney, they're probably looking for maps where they're going to spread them apart.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Like it's not even, you wouldn't even go like too wide for it's weird. You want kind of mid-range maps against Sydney because you want enough room for them to kind of isolate themselves, but then you also need enough, like you can't have too much room, too much ground to cover, because then you stretch yourself thin and then you end up in the same 1v1s you try to avoid. What you're looking for is for, so Sydney in particular is weak against situations where they can't stay close enough to sort of steamroll, but they also can't isolate you in 1v1s. So if you've got, like, this map is quite good for them because a lot of the time your players are kind of stuck in these like choke points, right? Like 3 people will drop down here. A bunch of people will drop down in the mid. There's fighting taking place here. There's fighting taking place on the glass, right? There's a lot of different places where it can happen, but it's all sort of in sequence. This map is a little bit of a maze if you think about it, right? Like you can only fight on glass once you've already sort of fought your way through here, and you fought your way through here, and you've taken the zone back. Maybe you fought through pit. Like there's a sequence to it, right? Where it sort of looks like this. It's a maze, but it's still a sequence. Whereas a lot of maps that Sydney, I think, does less well on. So Manta Maria is the one we are actually going to look at, and Manta Maria TC was like a really, really one-sided game, I believe. Like, I think Melbourne just knocked out, and doing no small part to the fact that Goose is on the carbon. I think this was the map that actually made Melbourne win the set, is because they had Goose on the carbon, and that just tilted Sydney, because fighting against a carbon is the worst thing in this entire game, aside from fighting bamboos, but luckily we don't have any of those. So the like this game, it's so much harder as Sydney to make these individual plays when you got a carbon to worry about, because every time you go off on your own on a flank or whatever, and this would apply to Shock too, if not for the fact that the carbon's on his team. Every time you go off on these kinds of flanks and you just get met by a carbon, who then they kill you and then they disappear, and you call them out on the death cam, but then like once your death cam's over, like where the hell are they? And then they catch someone else out, and then they catch someone else out by the same, like it's the most obnoxious thing. And this happens quite frequently on this map, but this map is also really difficult for that individual playmaking because of how much commitment there is involved in any particular fight, right? So like if you try to run in here, if you all sort of do the thing that I mentioned where you all kind of organically group up, you're going to end up in here. This is a death pit. You die if you go here, all right? So you have to end up kind of having people, okay, well, we want someone standing on the bunker, we want someone going over here and then flanking up through here, we want someone on the tower, we need to secure this part of the map without fighting over this, so we want to like go in through here on an opportunity, rather than like actually having Skidder just like run in here and try to fight people. Like all these things require you to have some decisiveness that is more structured. You need to actually tell people what to do, or you need to have a plan of what you want to do, or you need to think about your teammates more. And this really does not suit Sydney very well at all. Because I think part of the reason why they are so successful in doing what they do is because they are able to focus. It's kind of like clutching in games like Counter-Strike or Valorant. Some people lose their minds when they're in a clutch because they don't know what to do. Some people, it's actually easier to clutch than it is to play 5v5, because in a clutch, all you're worrying about is yourself. And this is kind of how Sydney, I think, a lot of Sydney's players think, is it's a lot easier for them to just worry about themselves, because then it allows them to just focus on taking each individual fight as it comes, rather than having to worry about like who's got which angle covered and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, as this game, like this is a fairly short game, so but like what we're looking for is like all the times where Goose just kind of catches someone. right? So Nerez is trying to get up onto the side here. Skitter's doing things in mid, and then actually Goose does get caught out this time, partly because it's a K-Pro he's fighting, but then at the same time everyone else just kind of loses their 1v1s all at the same time. This is the sort of thing that makes Sydney lose games, is like if they all lose 1v1s at the same time, they keep trying to take 1v1s, they never really stabilize. And that's where the 60-40, because they're coming out of spawn into people who are waiting for them, they're no longer 60-40 fights anymore. They're no longer straight up fights. They're coming into players who know that they're coming, know where to stand, know where the off angles are, etc. And they come in first, and they they show themselves. This is a really common problem for Skitter, but also this is just a Tetra thing. But like as you come up here, the Carbon can just sit here and watch you swim up, and then as you reach this point, the Carbon goes to the vertical flick and instantly kills you, and then you have to react to that. Right, whereas the whole time the Carbon knows exactly what's going on and is able to play perfectly against it. That is no longer the kind of 60-40 that Sydney tends to have going for them. Right, normally their fights are like Skitter doesn't know where Goose is, and Goose also doesn't know where Skitter is, and then they kind of stumble upon each other, and then Skitter fights Goose, and then Skitter happens to take out Goose because Skitter's, let's just say for the sake of argument, Skitter's the better player in this case, has the 60-40 advantage. When Goose knows what Skitter is doing, and Skitter is just sort of blithely walking into this Carbon trap, that no longer applies, and now Sydney doesn't win with their 1v1s anymore, which means they have to stabilize, they have to slow themselves down. But if they do that, or in order to do that, they need to actually stop doing what they normally do in terms of like taking individual kind of fights and actually coordinate with each other. And if they can't do that, then they fall apart, and this is kind of what happens toward the end of this game. I think it goes on a little while longer. I think they stop this push, and then Sydney pushes back, and then Melbourne just goes ham. So yeah, so they clean this one up. Meanwhile, we can also sort of see. I think we really see it a whole lot in this. I kind of picked the wrong games to talk about Melbourne, I must admit. It's not so much that Melbourne isn't doing their 3-1 thing. I think it's more just that we've spoken about Melbourne's 3-1 thing so often because it's the only thing they really do, and they're very consistent, and like it's always a factor in their games, that it's kind of like maybe we already know what Melbourne does. Maybe we just sort of focus on what the other teams do. I don't know.
No, I think, look, you have a play style where everyone defaults to, but like you said, this map kind of separates a few people because you can't put people in the death zone, and you can't. If you send 3 people in one direction on this map, it doesn't turn out how it should.
Yeah, I mean, like right here, as an example.
Right,
so
look,
they've got a push going.
Yeah.
They've got a push going. Gio's trying to make a play on the bottom side, and then Skitter also tries to make a play on the bottom side because they're both sort of thinking we want to go on the bottom side. That's we like going through here. This is a nice flanking option. But if you put two people
where
here,
else? Literally, they have cut.
Yeah,
and that's it. The objective is already very far away from cut.
But at the same time, like it's okay to do this, but at the same time, it's like you've got 2 people here. And meanwhile, who's dealing with bunker, right? Someone needs to be dealing with bunker, but nobody's doing it because everyone's kind of doing their own thing. And again, disclaimer: this is week 1, all right? So this is a week 1 game. It's okay to not have your coordination all together right now, but I believe that this is sort of the way Sydney is as a team. And even though they'll quite often just 1v1 their way to victory anyway, this is the sort of thing that catches them out. And you can, if you're Brisbane, if you're Melbourne, you can potentially take advantage of that by, maybe you do lose a game or 2 here or there, but then you take them to Manta Maria, you take them to Kelp Dome, you take them to Skipper, right? You take them to these kind of tactical maps where you have to rotate correctly, take the right parts of the map, and there isn't as much of a logical flow to things, and then you can potentially start beating them. I say Kelp, maybe not Kelp, because actually, I mean, they beat Brisbane on Kelp, but it was also, again, it was Brisbane versus Sydney, and they weren't really... They had Ray on Tetras, for example, in that game, so I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, that was... I have never seen Ray use Tetras.
Neither have I. Anyway, so... like, so this right here, this situation with Geo, where Geo should know in this situation that he has to go out, leave, run, right? Like Low is trying to get the lead here, that's fine. But Geo needs to know this is a 4v1. He needs to be gone, but he's still trying to fight Goy right here, right? And then he starts getting tagged by Shock and Goose and gets caught up. This is sort of stuff like this is why I think that Sydney is the way they are. Um, like it's sort of the evidence that I have where if they're more coordinated, thinking more about the team more, there's no lag between like um oh, I'm here and I'm fighting this guy, but hang on, my team is all dead because, and I know that because they're screaming in my ear and I'm paying attention to that, and now I need to get the hell out, right? So rather than worry about this, I can't fight this, so I need to get out. Whereas with Geo, it seems like there is definitely a bit of latency there, where he's fighting Goy without actually realizing that his team has crumbled around him, and then he's thinking, oh no, and then he starts running, but by that point it's too late. That kind of latency is what I look for. Is the sort of thing I look for when I'm trying to determine how a team actually functions. So it's stuff like that that makes me think that Sydney is a bit less structured in their coordination and more organic. So yeah, this is where things get really awkward because now Geo is kind of like you can sort of tell that Sydney's getting a bit desperate. And I think I made this comment in week one when we were talking about this. Is like this is where Goose I think tilted Sydney because he killed both Skitter and Geo at the same like basically one after the other. And now this all just falls apart because now they got to worry about Goose. But then guess what happens when you worry about Goose? Hang on, there's a guy called Shockwave on the enemy team as well, who
Yep.
is doing nothing but putting himself in situations where he's trying to use his team to like draw attention and going on flanks. And now you're worrying about Goose and you're worrying about Shock at the same and you're forgetting about Shock rather. So now Shock has complete free reign. So this is why, like I said, I mentioned that I think Melbourne is strongest with Goose. It's because Goose actually functions like he's arguably, you said yourselves, like the stat on Goose for KA is like equal with Shock basically. He's second place. Um, the when that is paired with what Shock's doing, and you have to actually worry about Goose, like he plays T-Tech, he plays other stuff like that. I think he should be on stuff like Carbon more often, because yeah, it's harder to fit like a Carbon into your comp. But if you've got to
Yeah.
worry about the Carbon and then like you're constantly looking for the Carbon, you forget to deal with Shock because you just don't have enough eyes in your team to look for both Shock and a Carbon roller. So
Yeah, exactly. A ninja squid in carbon roller.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
They've got it.
yeah,
Sorry, go on.
go ahead. No.
I was gonna say they've actually got they're gonna have a tough time picking their lineups. I feel for their games because they played a lot with Pitt as a backline. No one else is really gonna backline unless you have like the
Yeah, they have a couple of yeah.
K
You could get Sai to break out the old Charger or the Wolfone or something, much to her
Don't know if she'll do
chagrin.
that for them.
Yeah, she'll be real thrilled to learn that that's what a yeah. But yeah, like I think Melbourne like so I having said all that about Melbourne, I do think that they have the toughest time out of the three in the final in the playoffs, just because of like you say they're kind of lacking in terms of versatility. They don't have anyone on their team who plays T-Tech aside from Goose, and
Mm.
even then he's like that's not his weapon. Like he plays a good T-Tech, but it's like it's not the weapon that he's best at. Um,
Yeah.
Goy picks sloshes, Sai picks range blaster, Pit picks flatlings, Shock has a Nort. Shock can play most things, I think, but he's mostly picking stuff like Nort and Zap, like he's looking for matchup advantages. Where with the Nort, he has just a straight up matchup advantage against most things, and with Zap, he can armor himself to give himself a matchup advantage. Um, the like they don't have any kind of standard team players. Um, so it's really hard for them to put together teams that are cohesive. And we saw against Brisbane that they had Sai and Goy on the same team, and it was a bit of a nightmare just because like you put those two players on the team. It's not that the comp can't work; it's just that it's hard, right? If you have a Slosher Blaster comp, it's not that Slosher Blaster doesn't work because you think about it, Slosher and Blaster assisting each other is really insane. You instantly kill people most of the time,
Two
but
indirects, yeah.
yeah, two indirects and you instantly kill anything. But that's really hard to do because you need to actually have these players used to each other, understanding where they like to play, so that they stay together. Because in order to get those insta kills, you actually, like I was talking before about Sydney, how they have like this kind of organic teamwork. Organic teamwork is a good thing, right? If you don't have to think about what your team is doing and you just know that your team is there, right? It's really, really effective because instead of this sort of latency, like we said with Geo, this latency between the situation occurring and then your response to it, instead, if you're all kind of doing your own thing and happen to be together, right, and you can drill this, you can actually drill this into each other, like you can sort of practice this and understand I'm going to be here, so you need to be here, kind of thing, in advance, and then execute that in the game. This kind of organic teamwork works really, really well when you've got like a blaster and a slosher working together because they play off each other's angles, like they're both similar cuts of the map, but at the same time that requires Goy and Sai to actually develop that chemistry. It's difficult, it's really hard to do when they like this is the sort of thing you attribute to an actual team, like an organized team that's been around for years, where this is very much not the case for a draft tournament. So it's not that Melbourne's comps can't work, it's just that they're so much harder to execute, and it's quite often it's caught them out on a number of occasions. Like they're playing against players like when you're dealing with these kind of like rush down shooter oriented comps, like we saw that one moment where Sai got rushed down with a K Rapid. That's what happens to K Rapid. Is K Rapid is weak to getting rushed down. So you need your team to understand that when Sai is standing there fighting off a T-Tech with a K-Rapid, that she's going to need help with that. And that needs to be quick, because if you have to wait for Sai to say, I'm getting rushed down by a by a T-Tech, and then someone says, okay, I'm going to come over and help, by that point Sai's already dead. You actually need to be able to instantly respond. Right? That's where the organic teamwork comes in. That's why Sydney is effective on these maps where they can sort of converge on the same place and then they do their own thing, because they're not needing to communicate with each other. It's just sort of obvious what needs to happen at that point.
Yeah, and also let's not forget about Lobster, because I feel like Lobster plays an important role for the team as far as getting paint down. So, like I said, you could put any of those players in and you could make a comp. It's just whether they get it right for the map and the mode and what they're doing.
They've certainly got a lot more homework to do than most teams, that's for sure.
That's it.
I did mean to, like I'm sure Lob has a like T-Tech or K-Shot as well. It's just that he's mostly on the junior, right? So if you got, so what does that give us? We've got a junior picker, we've got a Splatling picker, we've got a Slosher and a Range Blaster, we've got a Carbon main who can play T-Tech and some other stuff as well, and then we've got Shock playing Nort and Zap. Like, we haven't really got that much in the way of conventional weapons in that comp really at all. So it's definitely hard for Melbourne to make things work, and I think it's kind of like how Sydney is the 60-40 team. Melbourne has a bit of an uphill battle with their comps, where they're quite often going into these games where they have to play better than the enemy team just to break even, and then they have to play even better than that to win. So it's kind of the opposite of Sydney. It's just that a lot of the time, because Melbourne is so effective at punishing these indecisive teams because of their 3-1 setup, like we mentioned before, it sort of works out for them in the end a lot of the time, because Shock and Lob and Sai and Go, like these guys can all make up that difference if you give them the opportunity. So, we've got a bit of time to briefly go over Sydney versus Brisbane. So, like I said, this one's a bit of an awkward one because it's. Hang on, let me just make sure I've got my games right here. Right, okay, I knew it wasn't this one. I was thinking game one, but no. So, like I said before, this set is a bit weird because you can kind of see, like, on the left here, yes, we've got Murray and Nero, but we've also got, like, Ray on Tetras, and we've also got Will on the Junior. So, there, again, we immediately see the whole, like, turtling and zombie strat is not going to work because you've got a Junior. So, and the Tetra, like, the Tetra is fine, obviously, it fits in quite well, but it's also a lot harder to use in this manner because you need to. You're not like I say zombie strat. It's not that you're running directly at the enemy team and just feeding. You're actually playing sort of still. You're still trying to keep yourself alive. It's just that you have like that insurance policy of if you fail, then it's not the end of the world. So with Tetras, you need to actually understand the weapon really well in order to play like that because the weapon itself is quite weak. The four shot kill is very slow and inaccurate, so it's like you going from T-Tac to Tetra is quite difficult. Um, but at the same time, we also see how Sydney, like look at Sydney's positioning right here. We've got one guy going on the tree flank. We've got Nereza sticking to the grates. We've got Geo sharking in top mid. We've got Silem coming from the other side. Like there is, everyone is doing their own thing. If they were playing against a, let's throw these guys up against say Untitled or Justice or something. If they do this against like an organized team who sees this and is like, oh, these guys are alone. These guys are alone. Kill these guys right now. You know, like there's that kind of shot call of just go kill. Then they fall apart. But when we're like, because the sort of like we can see straight away, Murray's trying to get to top mid. Ray goes in on Silo and Geo, but then Murray's a bit slow to respond, and now Geo and Silem are alive and now fighting a 2v1 against Murray. Right? Like this is where that kind of organic teamwork, as mentioned, is so important. Is because in situations like this is where you need that. You need to actually understand that you see this situation, like you see Silent by himself, you see Geo by himself, you're looking at the map, you know there's two people up here, so you know these guys are alone, so you know that you can just run at them and it'll be safe. You have to also know that your team is thinking like that, and if you don't, then you hesitate and you lose your opportunity. So, but yeah, so stylistically though, you can kind of see how when one person tries to make a play against Sydney, Silem and Geo both have the correct response, right? So the aggro is directed towards Silem, he backs up. Geo just kind of sits there. We'll watch this again. So Ray's about to go in. Silem's taking aggro. Geo knows that Ray has taken the bait on Silem, so he is the one who should be shooting. Like this is organic teamwork right here, and this is what Sydney's best at. Is each of them know what they're supposed to do in each situation relative to the enemy team, and if their teammate factors into it, then that's great, but they're not actively coordinating with their team on this kind of play, right? Geo is not, like, Silem is not telling Geo, hey, the guy's chasing me, you should shoot him. Silem just knows he's getting shot, he runs away. Geo knows he's not getting shot and he sees someone who's in range, so he shoots them. Like, I'm stressing this because this is basically all of mid-level Splatoon is like this. Like if you are good at this, you win games in mid-level Splatoon because there is no like need for advanced coordination.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The importance of having a threat level, causing the threat level, and then staying alive in a fight is just. And I mean, I think that's why I kind of draw towards Clapples and Julies and other things like that, because how good are Tetras for doing that? You know, you talk about Skitter and their three dashes they'll use to engage and fight, and the last dash they'll use to back off, hoping they'll either get an enemy overextending or someone else can kind of come in and kill them.
Yeah, whereas what you actually want is more like you use one dash to go in and three to get out, right? So it's sort of it's a different, like, just by that alone, you can see straight away the difficulty with Tetras and how easy it is to lose it, right? You're on a knife's edge with, like, I'm saying this as a Tetra main, like, you're on a knife's edge with Tetras. You can know fully well that you're supposed to run in with one dash and then get out with two or three, But then sometimes that guy's he's so close and he's one hit. You just want to dash in and then you feed and you lose. Yeah,
You're baiting me, FLC. I totally want to dash in.
um, which
I think
is which is why Ray on the Tetris here, by the way, is a little bit questionable. Because like you can play Tetris, you can have good aim, play Tetris, run at people, whatever. But the moment you have to actually think about your roles, it's like, oh, hang on a second. Yeah.
Right.
the issue I see with Ray on Tetris is that I don't see who's going to pair up with Ray on Tetris, and I feel like
Yeah,
Tetris.
it's the junior again that's the problem there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Which, like, at this point, I think Brisbane, because this game, it was basically just a fight over who gets to go to the finals, right? Like, Brisbane had already secured top spot.
yeah.
Yep.
So this match overall, you can kind of see why Brisbane isn't taking it super seriously. They just want to make sure that they get everyone's games in. Um, is like it doesn't really matter if Brisbane loses this. So they're just kind of making sure that Will gets some games in, making sure that Ray gets his games in. They're making sure that like they're just sort of seeing what happens, and this is good actually. Like this isn't about like having a pity party for the people who aren't like in the top four. It's about like, okay, what happens if we play Will, where he's not part of like he's playing junior instead of T-Tech. We usually have two T-Techs with this strategy, or a T-Tech K-shot, whatever. So what happens if we pick Tetra and Junior? Tetra Junior is a good combo, right? Like it's a classic combo that's worked out for a lot of teams in the past. Maybe we try that, see what happens. Okay, we've probably double dipped a little bit too much on the Junior with the Dynamo and the remix. It's kind of like who's actually going to push out of that, who's going to trade off the Tetras. But it's okay. We've tried it in a game that ultimately doesn't matter all that much. Like yes, we're going to play the semifinals instead of going straight to the finals as a result, but it's okay. We don't mind. We're already in the playoffs. And we also know that like this is something extra on top of what we already know works. So, hey, maybe this is like worst case, like sorry, best case, it actually works out, and then you've got even more things that the other team has to worry about. Imagine if we've just gone through what Brisbane does with their sort of 2-2 split with two people anchoring, two people pushing. Imagine if on top of that we're also talking about okay, they can do that, but they can also do this, where they've got like three people anchoring and then one Tetra is going ham. Probably not going to work. That's even just saying it sounds like it would never actually work out. But imagine like that's the sort of thing that you get in these situations where you're playing for like you don't really need to win, so you can just try things. And if it works, amazing. If it doesn't work, who cares? We still know we've still got plenty of stuff that works out for us in the end.
Yeah.
So Brisbane, like I said before, that Brisbane's the team to beat, and obviously they ended up like I think 3-2, but like they're still the team to beat because when they showed us their final form, they went 17-1.
Yes.
And then they started just playing kind of other stuff and just sort of making sure everyone got their games in, and then they started losing a little bit. But they're still like they're really really well put together. The only question I have is whether they've taken a little bit like not seriously enough and maybe given up a few too many games, and I've forgotten like how to actually remember to win, I guess.
How to turn it back on? Yeah.
But that would be my only concern. And it also is definitely like when we talk about these kinds of things, what we're looking at here is like the stylistic matchup, right? Of this is how Melbourne likes to play, this is how Brisbane likes to play. When these guys play, it's going to come down to which team needs to adapt first. Where if Brisbane has this really solid foundation, where they have this strategy that's just like if Melbourne has to adapt to Brisbane first, then Brisbane has all the options, right? So if Melbourne plays this weird comp just to beat Brisbane in like the first game, then Brisbane's able to go like, oh, okay, well they're doing that, so we just need to change this, and it's easy. Whereas if Melbourne goes in with that weird comp and it doesn't work, then they're 1-0 down, and they still haven't solved the problem yet, right? So Brisbane having this really solid foundation where the other team needs to understand how do we get rid of like, okay, this is a weird game, right? Because we've only got one Dynamo. We've only got the Dynamo, no Neru. We've only got Murray, not Nari. Like this, if Jeez, I lost my train of thought there for a second.
You
When
were
Melbourne, sorry. When in the semi-finals, when Melbourne goes to fight up against Brisbane, what's going to happen is Brisbane already knows they need to deal with shock, all right, and they've got the comp that is going to work for doing that. They've got the double anchor thing. They got two people to keep an eye on shock. Alzi can 1v1 shock just fine. Ray can probably handle shock just fine. JSOD is going to play weapons that like he can put himself in a situation where shock is at a disadvantage. Like it's all sorts of stuff that that Brisbane can do against shock, who is the main reason why who is the main sort of driving force behind a lot of Melbourne's wins. So Melbourne needs to come up with something that addresses that problem. Meanwhile, Brisbane just has to come up with ways that they can undermine all those potential counters. Right, so Brisbane has the advantage strategically going into this first set, and then likewise, Sydney, I would say, yeah, they're not tactically all that impressive, but it's still like the fact that they have such consistent wins in 1v1s and all that sort of stuff means that you need to deal with Sydney by having some way of handling these 1v1s. And I think Brisbane, again, has that. Whereas Melbourne, like, we sort of saw, yeah, Melbourne won against Sydney, but I feel like Sydney has a lot easier of a time, like, improving. Because in that first set against Melbourne, we had a couple of things, like Gia was picking things like L3 and K-Machine, which didn't really suit his role in the team. We talked about this in the first week. Whereas now, Sydney has sort of understood, okay, well, my role in the team is going to be this. It's a really simple step of just, what do I have to actually do in this team? So in Gio's case, I need to actually pick things that get quick kills because I need to be getting double kills, so picking a K-Machine is probably not the way to go. So Gio now understands his role in the team a lot better. I think Skitter understands their role in the team a lot better. I think all of them understand their role a lot better, whereas Melbourne has to actually, like, where Sydney is just making simple adjustments, Melbourne is instead having to, like, adjust. It's kind of awkward talking about Melbourne when we're looking at Brisbane versus Sydney, but Melbourne has to figure out how to sort of refine that 3-1 strategy, right? Like, how do we get more done with the 3-1? So it's a lot harder of a question. It's refinement rather than just, fixing basic, obvious things. So it's a lot harder for Melbourne to improve. And likewise, Brisbane, right, in the first week, they didn't have that kind of 2-2 thing going on. In the first week, they looked really shaky because they had just Murray and then 3 people running in and feeding, and then Murray would get overwhelmed. As soon as they switched up to Murray plus Neru, to the Fort Nari combo, they've now got this really strong, like, they only had to fix that one thing. They only needed to, like, that one piece, and now suddenly everything's sort of clicked. And so again, Melbourne, by comparison, has to refine these things. They started with a 3-1, and that's why they look so strong out the gate. But then they have to refine this playstyle. And it's a lot harder to do that. And even if they do refine their playstyle, refinement only gets you a small distance compared to actually just fixing something massive. Like, for Melbourne, the thing that they would have to fix that's massive is, what the hell do they do about the fact they've only got one T-Tech player?
Right. Yep. It's I refer to that as the 80-20 rule. So in that case, it took 20% effort to fix 80% of their problem.
Yes. Yeah.
But now the other way, where Melbourne has to spend 80% of the time to get a 20% increase.
Meanwhile, Sydney and Brisbane both have some of those 80-20s, like the 20% effort for 80% improvement, still have a couple of those left up their sleeve. Melbourne arguably does with, like, but how do you just make someone learn T-Tech, Well, T-Tech is a bad example. It's pretty easy. But, like, if they need a K-Pro player, who's going to play K-Pro? Goose, probably. But I think he's even picked K-Pro at a couple of points. But then, like,
or shock, but I think
but then they're losing
to play K-Pro.
Yeah, but then, like, they're losing one of the players who they need on, like, T-Tech or Ends Up or whatever, right? They're losing their kind of the meat in their sandwich. Or maybe it's the bread rather than the meat. I don't know. There's an analogy there. Just pretend it was a good one.
Yeah,
Um,
good. Oh, FLC, so wise.
yeah, yeah. So that's my concern with Melbourne, right? Like, is they've got this really difficult, like, it's an obvious problem, and if they fix it, then it's great. But it's also like, how do you actually fix the fact that you have this problem with your weapon comps? Whereas Sydney just has to have some basic coordination. Brisbane just has to, like, they've already fixed their sort of teamwork thing, and now they just have to make sure that they understand. Okay, well, when do we want JSOD versus when do we want Ray, and when do we want Owlsy to take a break and let Will come in, for example? Because like
Mhm.
they showed they were quite good with Will and Ray. They just needed Will on the NZAP. And then on top of that, we're also looking at a game where they have got Murray +3 and they are stomping Sydney. Right? This is not a
Right,
close game.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this is, because of the NZAP, because Ray's having a good game.
Yeah.
JSOD's, sharing the aggression up front as well. Um, it's quite relentless between the three of them at the front. We almost see like almost like an Adelaide-esque kind of frontline pack hunting
Yeah.
with those guys.
Yeah, and I mean, you also like the other question is like when is it appropriate to not run the Nuri combo and instead just have Murray or Neru plus three people being aggressive, because sometimes it works. We even saw in the Brisbane versus Perth set in week one. Sorry, Brisbane versus, was it Perth? It was Perth, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
now I'm confused because I think I said that it was Brisbane versus Adelaide in week one.
Brisbane
Um,
Adelaide was week one. No, yeah, Brisbane Adelaide was week one
it
where they
was
lost.
okay.
And
Yeah,
Oh,
Perth
okay.
was week
it
two.
was Perth. Who did Perth beat? Perth beat New Zealand. Sorry, I
Yep.
I just remember the memes and I was thinking that it was like Adelaide. Never mind. Okay, it's all
Do
good.
you also remember the league based on Owsie's memes?
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's
It's yeah,
my
yeah,
that's how it all works.
that's it.
Yeah, no, like I don't actually know the results of these games after I analyze them. I just remember them based off whether Alzi made a funny about it or not.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
So do
so like even in that first week where Brisbane didn't have their sort of two setup that we've just been talking about, they did have some very convincing games where they had like I think a straight knockout on TC Manta Maria, just because in that case they didn't need the double anchor to do their thing. Their strat still worked with a single anchor being Murray. So it's definitely like Brisbane has a lot more uh, going for them in terms of like their baseline is very high with their main lineup. They have a lot of things that they can do. It's very hard to play against this 2-2 setup. And then on top of that, if they identify maps where the 2-2 isn't quite as good, or maybe the 3-1 is just better, they can also like bring it out. So Brisbane is definitely the most complete team of the three. And I said
the
this like
final boss.
yeah, I've said this a couple of weeks now. Even though they're 3-2, they're definitely the strongest team to me.
Yep.
But
Okay.
the way Melbourne wins and the way Sydney wins is also very distinctive. And it's not as though Brisbane's just going to like walk over these teams. They can definitely lose to both of these teams.
Oh, right, and it comes down to how they play on the game and how they play on the day,
Yep.
what maps and modes they pick, and they it is still anyone's game. Although on paper, I definitely agree with you as far as Brisbane having all the goods to bring it home.
Yeah. I mean, like, just looking at this, I'm thinking if Sydney's going to win, they're going to need pretty much like they need to figure out some way to deal with to like work together and deal with Murray and Nero. If Melbourne's going to win, they need some way to um, either get Shock in and like keep Murray and Nero out of position, which is very difficult to do because they have a lot more control of their positioning than you do. You being Melbourne, obviously. Or they need to think about how they can run comps that can very efficiently deal with the zombie part of the strat, and then they can focus all of their resources on unseating Neru, the Neru and Murray combo. So that's sort of the again we talked about these strats that it's not that one strat beats another strat, it's that strats have aspects to them that some of them are strong against others. Like it's all about the nuance. It's not about like the numbers I'm putting together on like it's not about 3-1 versus 2-2. It's like how do these anyway, sorry. Just some
No, I
underlying frustrations at years of having to explain this to people. The 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 thing with Brisbane versus Melbourne is that if Melbourne can figure out a way to make that 3 like shrug off the zombies, not just like beat them, but actually just basically flick them away, have zero concern in the world. It's just, oh, these guys again, let's just get rid of them. And I think, carbon could be a big part of that. If the carbon is able to just instantly kill one of them, then yeah, they're going to respawn in 2 seconds time, but that's fine because you can still dedicate all of your resources toward just throwing like 4 specials at Murray, right? Or whatever. If you don't die and if you don't have to use specials to kill like Alzian Ray or Alzian J-Sword or whatever, then you can use all of those specials to get rid of Murray and Neru. They're not going to go down easily, but you can definitely gain a lot of ground doing that. Or you can, like we saw, one of the difficulties was, you use all your resources to take one part of the map, and then they just jump back to the mid part of the map, and then you have to do it all over again. Maybe Melbourne figures out how to actually ration their resources out appropriately, so that they're only using like 2 specials to push Murray and Neru back the first time, and then they're using the next 2 specials to push them back a second time. Get some momentum going, So that's the sort of thing that Melbourne has to figure out in order to beat Brisbane this coming weekend rather. So
yeah, and that's going to be a tough ask for either team to take the victory. I don't think it's going to be a stomp either way. Hopefully it comes down to core strategy and not just some clutch moments in the game. Because it's you can talk about strategy until the everyone's blue in the face, but in the dying seconds of the game, if someone gets a kill over the other one or someone runs into a bomb accidentally, this is such a hectic game that it can only take you so far. It can only minimize the risk, not get rid of it.
Yeah, and I mean we had, I think the first game in this set was determined by Alzi disconnecting, so we've also got that to consider.
Yep.
I think we could pretty much throw this set out because, like you said, Brisbane never quite had probably their team that they'll go with in the finals. But equally, Sydney's missing Cookie, and I think Skiddo only played 1 game. So
yeah, this was a weird game. Like it's hard to take anything from this particular set, which is kind of why I left it to last and didn't really talk about it a whole lot.
Yeah, I think Sydney's still an unknown as like obviously they played Melbourne in the first round, so how much can we take away from that? And then to play Brisbane, well, they beat Brisbane, but both teams sort of weren't at full strength.
They couldn't use Xylem versus Melbourne because Xylem disconnected. They didn't want to risk that again, and then they didn't use Skidder and Cookie versus Brisbane. So and Brisbane also didn't use their full lineup against Sydney, and Brisbane versus Melbourne. Melbourne didn't have Lobster, and Brisbane didn't have. I think it was Alzi.
Yeah, and Shock was playing on a balcony and on holiday or something.
That's okay. Right. Yeah.
There you go. So yeah, we haven't actually had a full strength fight between any of these 3 teams. So all we have to go on is what's going to happen when the things that work, the things that these guys default to, sort of clashes against each other. And this is sort of what I've been trying to unpack for the last 2 hours. I know it's been a little bit different compared to the last couple of games because the last couple of weeks, because obviously we haven't got specific games to talk about. We're just sort of using these examples instead. But but it's good that it's kind of come to a head like this, right? Where you have 3 different play styles. Unfortunately, they're all Eastern States team for whatever reason, considering it's a draft tournament. Yeah. But Eastern States just happened to win for whatever reason. I mean, Adelaide was close. So
Adelaide was close, right. But they've all got very distinct styles, and they all kind of play almost a paper scissors rock with each other, depending on how they want to play certain game modes against certain people with certain teams. They all have the ability to take out each other. So I think that the winner of the next game and even the winner of the grand final is going to come down to who practices more now and who actually brings it on game day.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not about who has the best strategy. It's definitely about who understands the strategies best.
Yes. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, if nothing else, I think the we've got all three teams have a lot of work to do if they want to win, because ultimately, if Brisbane sort of gets comfortable thinking, oh yeah, we've got this kick-ass strat that's gonna dominate, then, I mean, if they haven't practiced it, and if they don't know how to keep it together in the dying moments, because keep in mind, the difficult part of Brisbane strat is that when the wheels come off, it's really hard to get them back on again. Right?
Yeah.
If Murray's the first person out of spawn and has to deal with, like, what do we do?
Yeah.
Like, he's very vulnerable in that moment. So is Neru.
Yeah.
Just because of the nature of the game, it's nothing to do with them as players. So
Right.
if they're getting all comfy, thinking, "Oh yeah, we got this in the bag, guys," and they forget to, like, and they haven't actually been in those clutch moments where they have to put the pieces back together and they have to do things exactly right, they could very easily fall apart.
Yeah, and that's amplified with small maps. That's amplified if a team like Sydney, for example, knows when they get the pick, they're on to the next one. They're just pushing further and further up every time. So, there's going to be so much strategy to making those wheels fall off for Brisbane, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, and on top of that, like, if Sydney goes into this with everyone knowing, oh yeah, if we kill Murray and the team falls apart and Murray's first out of spawn, we know that we can isolate him and kill him. Like, if everyone can just know that, and they'll be a lot more decisive together. They won't even need to coordinate and, like, have one person screaming, "I killed Murray." we can just sort of have four people who all look at the scoreboard and say, "Oh hey, the Dynamo's dead. We can do our thing." Right? It's all of these strats, like, yes, Sydney is less organized. Yes, Brisbane is more organized. That doesn't mean, like, it's all about who understands what's going on, who is able to put the pieces together and make and win the game. Like, it sort of seems reductionist to say all you have to do is win, but that's the only thing that matters is winning. It's not about which strat is better. It's not about which strat has the most holes or whatever. It's about who wins the damn game. And decisiveness is the key to that. Having your strategy, understanding how it works, knowing what you have to do, and just doing it faster and more cleanly than any other team is how you win tournaments, how you win games. It's not about having the best strat. Yeah.
And it's how you take home $1,000 next Sunday for your team. So we've got this weekend, guys, is going to be Sunday. We're going to be starting at our usual time. We have talked about moving it back. I think we're just keeping it as is.
Sure. Sounds good.
Right. So just to keep all the viewers there, everyone playing at the same time, let's not reorganize anything.
Sleep.
Yeah.
No.
What? Extra sleep?
Yeah. I mean,
we can go to bed an hour earlier the night before, Checkers. Be responsible.
No, that's not how I work.
Yes, so this Sunday is going to be huge. It is the second last game for the Firetail League. It's the semi-finals between Melbourne and Sydney, with a winner of that taking on Brisbane Boom the week after, once again on another Sunday. So,
no.
Yeah,
no? Melbourne versus Brisbane, and then Sydney as the finals.
Sorry. Yes.
We were just talking about how good Brisbane is, but they're actually third in the standings right now.
But they're actually third. Yes,
exactly. It's hard to sort of pivot from the expectations to the reality sometimes. It's okay.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I'm constantly out of reality, out of touch. Yes, I have the firetailevents.com website where you can see all the current stats and see what we're talking about, and also I can see the season ladder. So the Brisbane Boom, who are third, are versing the Melbourne Maelstrom, who are second on Sunday. And then the winner of that will take on the Sydney Endeavour next Sunday. So this is going to be absolutely massive, guys, and we hope that we can see you all there. But before that happens, we've got our last Carry the Commissioner with Sydney, where they have the last chance to beat New Zealand and Russia's score out of all teams of 2-2-4-4.
I shaded our team. They've been through enough.
Hey, I mean, just look, they got the wooden spoon, but they got the highest score in Carry the Commissioners. So,
They
who's the
did.
real winners?
Yeah, exactly. At least they're walking away with a prize. Yeah, or two of them. Anyway, no, everyone's a winner in my books, and we all have jerseys, so that's pretty cool. So yes, we'll see you this Thursday for Carry the Commissioner. That starts at 6, and
Okay.
then 8 p.m. AEST, which is 6 p.m.
Our
WST.
yes.
Yes. Cool. Great, guys. Anything else from you before we close shop?
Look, I think you've said it all perfectly. So
I think I've gotten everything wrong.
no, it's been great. I'm looking forward to next week and breaking down the exciting match that will happen this weekend, and previewing the finals. So
Yes.
thank you to FLC for again guiding us through how the hell to play this game.
Yes. Which is I like that the analysis is getting much more detailed and in depth because the teams are allowing that to happen, because it's now coming down to the small differences, and the minute is going to be the reason people come out on top. So thank you very much, FLC.
Yep.
And good night to everyone.
Good
night.
night.